Influence is one of the most powerful forces in human history, yet it is also one of the most misunderstood. Many people believe influence is tied only to physical presence, to a voice that can still speak, a body that can still stand on a stage, a name that can still appear in headlines. But history repeatedly proves a deeper truth. The power of influence does not end with a person. When an individual leaves behind ideas, movements, or inspired followers, their impact often grows stronger with time rather than weaker. Headlines fade, faces disappear from public view, and names slowly move from daily conversation into memory. But influence has a way of outliving flesh. It continues to shape culture, conversations, beliefs, and decisions long after the individual is gone or silent. Ideas are the most enduring form of influence. A person may die, step away, or lose public attention, but ideas do not obey the laws of mortality. Once an idea is released into the world, it becomes part of a larger stream of thought that others can carry forward, reshape, challenge, or defend. Ideas travel across borders, generations, and cultures without needing their creator to be present. This is why philosophers, reformers, and thinkers from centuries ago still influence how societies think today. Their words are quoted, debated, criticized, and built upon. Even when people disagree with them, the disagreement itself proves their influence. Silence would mean irrelevance, but ongoing discussion means the idea is still alive. Movements take influence a step further by turning ideas into collective action. When an idea resonates deeply enough, it no longer belongs to one person, it belongs to a group. At that point, the influence becomes decentralized. The movement gains momentum because many people begin to see the idea as part of their identity. They speak it in their own words, apply it to their own lives, and defend it in their own communities. This is why movements often survive the loss of their original leaders. The leader may have been the spark, but the fire continues to burn because others are now feeding it. In some cases, the movement even grows after the leader is gone, because the absence forces followers to take responsibility rather than depend on one voice. Followers themselves are living carriers of influence. When someone has truly influenced others, their thoughts, attitudes, and behaviors become embedded in the lives of those they touched. These followers then pass on what they learned, consciously or unconsciously, to new people. A mentor's influence appears in the way a student teaches others. A leader's influence appears in how a community organizes itself. A speaker's influence appears in the confidence or conviction of those who heard them. This ripple effect means that one person's influence can multiply far beyond what they ever personally did. Long after the original source is gone, the echoes remain. Culture is especially shaped by this kind of lasting influence. Cultural norms, values, and debates rarely come from nowhere. They are usually the result of long-standing ideas that have been reinforced over time. Influential figures help set these ideas into motion. They introduce language that people adopt, questions that people begin to ask, and frameworks through which people interpret the world. Even when society moves on to new issues, it often does so using the intellectual tools given by past influencers. In this way, influence becomes part of the cultural infrastructure, something people rely on without always realizing where it came from. Another reason influence outlives individuals is that humans are storytellers by nature. Stories preserve influence. When people talk about influential figures, they don't just recount facts, they interpret meaning. Stories about a person's courage, controversy, wisdom, or mistakes become lessons. These lessons are retold to inspire, warn, or challenge others. Over time, the story may change, but the core influence remains. The person becomes a symbol, and symbols are powerful because they condense complex ideas into something memorable. A symbol can motivate people long after the original context has disappeared. Conflict also extends influence. Figures who provoke strong reactions, whether admiration or opposition, often leave especially lasting legacies. When someone challenges the status quo, they force society to respond. That response can take the form of support, resistance, reform, or backlash. Either way, the influence is undeniable because it alters the conversation. Laws change, institutions adjust, and people re-evaluate their beliefs. Even critics contribute to the influencer's legacy by keeping their ideas in circulation. In this sense, influence does not require universal approval, it requires significance. Time plays an interesting role in shaping influence. While media cycles move quickly, true influence moves slowly and deeply. Immediate reactions may be emotional and polarized, but as time passes, society begins to reflect. People separate personality from principle, behavior from belief, and momentary controversy from lasting impact. This reflection often leads to a more nuanced understanding of the influencer's role. Some ideas are rejected, others refined, and some adopted more widely than ever before. The person may no longer control how they are interpreted, but their influence continues through this ongoing evaluation. Technology has amplified the endurance of influence. In earlier eras, influence depended on oral tradition or limited written records. Today, speeches, interviews, writings, and digital content can be accessed instantly, even years later. This creates a form of digital permanence. New generations encounter influential figures not as distant historical names, but as vivid voices speaking directly to them through screens. This accessibility allows influence to leap across time, almost unchanged, giving it renewed relevance in contexts the original person may never have imagined. However, the persistence of influence also brings responsibility. Influence does not disappear, but it can be misused, distorted, or weaponized after a person is gone. Ideas can be taken out of context or pushed to extremes. This is why the legacy of influence is often contested. Supporters and critics alike fight over interpretation. Yet even this struggle reinforces the core truth. The influence still matters. If it didn't, no one would bother arguing about it. At a deeper level, the endurance of influence speaks to a human desire for meaning beyond individual life. People want their lives to matter, to contribute to something larger than themselves. Influence is one way this happens. When someone's ideas continue to shape others, it suggests that human actions can transcend time. This belief motivates leaders, thinkers, and ordinary individuals alike to speak, write, teach, and act with intention. They understand, consciously or not, that what they do today may shape tomorrow in ways they will never see. Ultimately, the power of influence not ending with a person reminds us that legacy is not about fame or attention alone. It is about transfer. What values are passed on? What questions are planted? What courage is awakened in others? Headlines may capture a moment, but influence captures a direction. It points people somewhere, toward a belief, a behavior, or a way of seeing the world. Even when the person who pointed the way is no longer present, the path remains. This truth challenges both influencers and audiences. For those who hold influence, it is a reminder to be mindful of what they release into the world, because it may travel farther and last longer than intended. For those who receive influence, it is a call to think critically, to choose what to carry forward, and to take responsibility for how ideas are lived out. Influence does not end with a person because people themselves become the continuation of what they believe. In that sense, influence never truly dies. It simply changes hands and moves forward through time. The way a society responds to events, individuals, and moments of tension reveals far more than official statements or written laws ever could. Public reaction acts like a mirror, reflecting the true values, fears, hopes, and priorities of a culture. When people respond with support, criticism, silence, outrage, or reflection, they are unconsciously declaring what matters most to them. These reactions expose whether a society values free speech or control, unity or division, thoughtful dialogue or emotional conflict. Long after the event itself fades, the response becomes the real evidence of who we are and what we stand for. Support is often the most visible reaction, and it speaks volumes about collective beliefs. When large groups of people rally behind an individual or an idea, they are not just endorsing a person, they are affirming the values that person represents. Support can signal a society's commitment to principles such as courage, independence, faith, tradition, or progress. It shows what kind of leadership people admire and what narratives resonate with their lived experiences. Applause, public defense, donations, and vocal solidarity are all expressions of shared identity. In these moments, society reveals what it wants to protect and promote. Criticism, on the other hand, reveals boundaries. It shows what a society refuses to accept and where it draws moral or ideological lines. Public criticism can emerge from genuine concern, ethical disagreement, or fear of change. Sometimes it reflects a healthy culture that questions power and demands accountability. At other times, it exposes intolerance, insecurity, or an unwillingness to engage with opposing viewpoints. The tone of criticism matters as much as the content. Constructive critique suggests maturity and depth, while hostile attacks point to polarization and emotional instability. Through criticism, a society reveals not only what it opposes, but how it handles disagreement. Reflection is perhaps the most revealing response, yet it is often the quietest. When a society pauses to think rather than immediately react, it demonstrates a commitment to wisdom over impulse. Reflection shows a willingness to examine complex realities instead of reducing them to slogans or sides. It allows room for nuance, acknowledging that most issues are not purely good or evil. Cultures that value reflection encourage discussion, learning, and growth. They understand that strong values are not threatened by questioning but strengthened by it. Reflection reveals a society that prioritizes understanding over winning arguments. Silence is also a response, and it can be just as telling as noise. Silence may indicate fear, apathy, exhaustion, or strategic avoidance. In some cases, it reflects oppression, where people feel unsafe expressing their views. In others, it reveals indifference, where an issue fails to touch the collective conscience. Silence can expose uncomfortable truths about whose voices matter and whose do not. When a society remains silent during moments that demand moral clarity, that silence becomes part of its value system, whether acknowledged or not. Public reaction also highlights how much a society values free speech. In moments of controversy, the treatment of dissenting voices becomes a test of cultural maturity. Societies that value free speech allow disagreement without dehumanization. They understand that expression, even when uncomfortable, is essential for progress. In contrast, cultures that rush to silence opposing views often reveal a deeper insecurity. Suppression suggests fear of ideas rather than confidence in truth. How a society handles speech it dislikes is one of the clearest indicators of its commitment to freedom. Leadership is another value exposed through public response. When people look to leaders for guidance during moments of crisis or controversy, their expectations reveal what they believe leadership should be. Do they seek calm and wisdom, or aggression and dominance? Do they reward humility and accountability, or blind loyalty? Public reaction to leaders' words and actions shows whether authority is respected because it is earned or simply because it exists. A society's treatment of its leaders, both in praise and criticism, reveals how power is understood and legitimized. Unity and division often become most visible during times of tension. Shared challenges can either bring people together or push them further apart. When a society responds with empathy and cooperation, it shows a commitment to collective well-being. When reactions become tribal and hostile, it exposes deep fractures. Division often thrives on simplified narratives and emotional manipulation, while unity requires patience and mutual respect. The speed with which people choose sides, label enemies, and reject dialogue reveals whether a culture values connection or conflict. Media plays a significant role in shaping and amplifying public reaction, but society still chooses what it consumes and shares. Viral outrage, selective storytelling, and sensationalism often reflect a preference for emotion over accuracy. When misinformation spreads faster than verified facts, it reveals a culture driven by confirmation rather than truth. At the same time, the demand for thoughtful journalism and long-form discussion shows a hunger for depth. What a society amplifies through media reveals its intellectual appetite and emotional priorities. Public reaction also exposes generational differences in values. Younger and older generations often respond differently to the same event, shaped by distinct experiences and expectations. These contrasts highlight shifting cultural priorities over time. What one generation sees as progress, another may view as loss. These differences are not just conflicts. They are evidence of a living culture negotiating its identity. How these generational responses interact, whether through dialogue or dismissal, reveals a society's capacity for continuity and change. Emotion is a powerful driver of reaction, and the balance between emotion and reason is a key indicator of societal health. Emotional responses are natural and human, especially in moments of shock or loss. However, when emotion replaces reason entirely, it can lead to chaos and injustice. Societies that allow space for feeling while still valuing facts and fairness demonstrate emotional intelligence. Those that glorify outrage and instant judgment reveal a preference for release over responsibility. The way emotion is expressed and managed publicly shows how deeply a culture understands itself. Public reaction also reflects moral priorities. Who is defended? Who is condemned? Who is ignored? These choices reveal whose lives, voices, and struggles are considered important. When society rallies around certain causes while dismissing others, it exposes hierarchies of concern. Moral consistency, or the lack of it, becomes visible in moments of widespread reaction. A culture's ethics are not only found in its ideals, but in how those ideals are applied under pressure. Over time, patterns of reaction form a cultural memory. People remember not just what happened, but how everyone responded. These memories shape trust in institutions, faith in community, and expectations for the future. Repeated experiences of injustice or division can lead to cynicism and withdrawal. Repeated experiences of fairness and dialogue can build resilience and hope. Public reaction today becomes the foundation for tomorrow's attitudes. Ultimately, how society responds reveals its values because reactions are instinctive before they are strategic. In moments of tension, masks fall away. People show what they truly believe about freedom, responsibility, compassion, and power. Support, criticism, reflection, and silence all speak. Together, they form a collective voice that tells a deeper story than any single event ever could. That story defines the character of a culture, not in theory, but in practice. Moments of shock have a unique power over the human mind. They interrupt routine, silence assumptions, and force attention in a way few other experiences can. Whether the shock comes from a sudden event, a hypothetical loss, or an unexpected turn in public life, it creates a pause in the normal flow of thought. In that pause, society is confronted with questions it often avoids during times of comfort. What once felt distant becomes immediate. What once seemed certain becomes fragile. Shock, by its very nature, strips away distraction and demands reflection. A hypothetical loss is especially powerful because it forces people to imagine absence before it becomes reality. It asks society to consider what would happen if a voice were suddenly gone, if a leadership role were left empty, or if an idea no longer had its most visible representative. This imagined absence creates space for evaluation. People begin to assess what truly mattered about the individual or influence in question. Was it the personality, the message, the authority, or the courage to speak? By imagining loss, society gains clarity about value. In these moments, leadership becomes a central question. Shock exposes how much leadership is tied to individuals rather than principles. When people fear the disappearance of a leader, it often reveals a dependence on personality over structure. This can be a warning sign. Strong leadership should inspire others to lead, not leave a vacuum when removed. Reflection following shock allows society to ask whether it has invested too much power in individuals and too little in shared values. It encourages a shift from hero worship to responsibility sharing. Responsibility also comes into sharper focus during moments of reflection. In times of stability, responsibility is easily deferred. People assume that someone else will handle problems, speak up, or carry the burden of decision-making. Shock disrupts this comfort. It forces individuals and communities to ask what role they themselves play. If a leader or voice were no longer present, who would step forward? Who would protect the core ideas? Who would ensure that discourse remains thoughtful rather than chaotic? These questions push responsibility downward from the few to the many. Emotional reactions are inevitable in moments of shock, but reflection determines whether emotion becomes destructive or transformative. Immediate responses are often driven by fear, anger, or grief. These emotions are natural and human, yet they are rarely good guides for long-term decisions. Reflection allows emotion to settle into understanding. It creates distance between impulse and action. Societies that rush to judgment during shock often deepen division and regret their haste later. Those that pause to reflect are more likely to respond with wisdom. Reflection also challenges the way ideas are carried forward. When a figure or influence is hypothetically removed, ideas must stand on their own strength. This reveals whether those ideas were truly understood or merely repeated. Reflection asks whether followers can articulate the principles behind the message without relying on the original voice. It encourages deeper engagement, moving beyond slogans towards substance. In this way, shock becomes a test of intellectual and moral maturity. Moments of shock often reveal the difference between loyalty and understanding. Loyalty driven by emotion can be loud but shallow, while understanding rooted in reflection is quiet but durable. When people react purely out of loyalty, they may defend actions they have not fully examined. Reflection invites a different approach. It asks people to separate the value of an idea from the flaws of a person, to acknowledge complexity without abandoning conviction. This balance is difficult, but it is essential for growth. Or the way society reflects after shock also reveals how it handles power. Shock disrupts established hierarchies, even temporarily. In that disruption, there is an opportunity to reconsider how power should be distributed and exercised. Reflection allows for questions about accountability, transparency, and ethical leadership. It opens conversations about whether systems are designed to serve people or to protect themselves. Without reflection, shock simply reinforces existing power structures through fear-driven reactions. Hypothetical loss also invites generational reflection. Younger generations may ask what kind of leadership they want to inherit, while older generations may reflect on what they are leaving behind. This cross-generational dialogue can either deepen misunderstanding or foster continuity. Reflection creates the possibility of learning across age and experience. It encourages the transfer of wisdom rather than the repetition of mistakes. Another important aspect of reflection is the reevaluation of priorities. Shock exposes what society has been taking for granted. It can reveal neglected values such as humility, listening, and patience. Reflection allows communities to realign their focus, deciding what deserves energy and what does not. It encourages a move away from constant reaction toward intentional direction. In this sense, shock becomes a moment of recalibration. Reflection also humanizes public life. During normal times, public figures are often reduced to symbols or caricatures. Shock breaks through these simplifications by reminding people of vulnerability and impermanence. Reflection restores a sense of humanity, allowing for empathy even amid disagreement. This does not require abandoning principles. It requires recognizing that complexity is part of reality. A society capable of this kind of reflection is less likely to dehumanize and more likely to heal. The danger, however, is that shock can be wasted. Without reflection, it becomes just another spike in the emotional cycle of news and social media. People react intensely and then move on without learning anything. Reflection requires intention. It requires slowing down in a culture that rewards speed. It requires listening in a climate that rewards volume. Choosing reflection over reaction is itself an act of leadership. Ultimately, moments of shock becoming moments of reflection is a sign of societal maturity. It shows a willingness to learn rather than merely feel, to grow rather than simply grieve or rage. Hypothetical loss, when approached with wisdom, becomes a tool for deeper understanding. It prompts questions about leadership that go beyond personalities, responsibility that goes beyond convenience, and ideas that must be carried forward with care. When society allows shock to lead to reflection, it transforms disruption into direction. The moment that could have fractured becomes one that clarifies. The imagined absence becomes a call to presence, a call for individuals to think more deeply, act more responsibly, and carry ideas forward not with blind emotion but with deliberate wisdom.